The day Olivia Carter lost everything, she had no idea destiny was already searching for her. Snow drifted slowly through the gray afternoon sky as Olivia stood at the edge of Moonridge-packed territory, her hands clenched tightly around the strap of a worn canvas bag. The winter wind tugged at her long blonde hair and stung her cheeks, but she barely noticed. The ache inside her chest hurt far more than the cold ever could. A crowd had gathered behind her near the packed square. Some watched openly. Others pretended not to. No one stepped forward. No one called her name. No one asked her to stay. At 23 years old, Olivia had spent most of her life trying to earn a place among people who had never truly accepted her. She had followed every rule, worked harder than anyone else, offered kindness even when kindness was rarely returned. Yet somehow it had never been enough. Earlier that morning, everything had finally fallen apart. The man she had believed she would spend her future with had stood before the entire pack and announced that he had chosen someone else. Someone stronger. Someone more valuable. Someone worthy of standing beside him. The words themselves had hurt, but not as much as the silence that followed. Not a single voice had defended her. Not one. Olivia lowered her gaze toward the snow-covered road stretching beyond the village. The familiar cabins, lanterns, and winding paths behind her no longer felt like home. Perhaps they never had. A sharp gust of wind swept through the square, carrying laughter from somewhere in the distance. The sound faded quickly, but it was enough. Olivia took her first step away from Moonridge. Then another, and another. No one stopped her. By sunset, the pack had disappeared behind miles of snow-covered forest. The sky darkened into shades of blue and silver. Tall pines lined the narrow trail ahead, their branches heavy with fresh snow. Olivia walked until exhaustion settled deep into her legs. Eventually, she reached a small abandoned cabin near the edge of the northern woods. The structure was old but sturdy. A thin layer of snow covered the roof. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney. It looked forgotten, just like her. She pushed open the creaking wooden door and stepped inside. Dust covered the floor. A stone fireplace sat against one wall. A simple bed frame rested in the corner beneath a small window. It was not much. Yet for the first time all day, Olivia felt something unexpected. Relief. No judging eyes. No whispers. No disappointment. Just silence. She knelt beside the fireplace and carefully lit a small fire. Warm orange light soon danced across the wooden walls. The cabin felt less lonely that way. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, Olivia sat quietly near the flames and stared into the fire. She should have felt angry. She should have hated the people who had abandoned her. Yet anger never came. Instead, she found herself wondering what kind of life waited beyond the forest. Somewhere out there, beyond the mountains and frozen rivers, the world continued turning. Perhaps there was still a place where she belonged. The thought seemed foolish. Even so, it refused to leave her. As night settled over the wilderness, Olivia wrapped herself in a blanket and closed her eyes beside the fire. She did not know that far beyond the northern mountains, a powerful alpha king was fighting his own battle against fate. She did not know their paths were already moving toward each other. She only knew one simple truth. For the first time in years, there was no one left expecting her to fail. And somehow, that felt like the beginning of something. Winter settled deeply across the northern wilderness, and the days slowly blended together like falling snow. 3 months passed after Olivia left Moonridge Pack behind. The pain of that final day never disappeared completely, but it changed. At first it had felt sharp and unbearable. Now it lingered like an old scar. Something she carried rather than something that controlled her. The small cabin gradually became a home. Each morning, she woke before sunrise and stepped into the frozen forest with a woven basket hanging from her arm. She gathered firewood, collected herbs hidden beneath the snow, and checked the small traps she had carefully placed along the edges of the woods. The work was simple, honest, quiet. There were no expectations here. No one measured her worth. No one reminded her of what she lacked. The forest accepted her exactly as she was. On clear mornings, golden sunlight spilled through the towering pine trees and painted long shadows across the snow. Olivia often paused to admire the beauty around her. She had spent years trapped inside a life that never truly belonged to her. Only now did she realize how rarely she had stopped to appreciate the world itself. Some afternoons, she sat beside the frozen creek a quarter-mile from the cabin and watched the water move beneath sheets of crystal ice. Other days, she spent hours repairing the cabin or tending a small winter garden protected beneath handmade coverings. Life was difficult, but it was hers. The loneliness remained, however. It always arrived at night, when darkness filled the woods and the fire crackled softly inside the cabin. Silence became harder to ignore. There was no laughter, no conversation, no familiar voice calling her name. Some evenings Olivia found herself staring into the flames and wondering whether anyone in Moonridge even remembered she existed. The answer was probably no. Strangely, that thought no longer hurt as much as it once would have. One snowy evening, a powerful storm rolled across the mountains. Wind rattled the cabin walls while snow struck the windows in soft waves. Olivia sat near the fireplace wrapped in a thick blanket, reading from an old book she had discovered inside a forgotten storage chest. The pages were worn with age, filled with stories about ancient alpha kings, legendary wolves, and distant kingdoms hidden beyond the northern ranges. Most people considered such tales myths. Olivia had always loved them anyway. The stories spoke of courage, sacrifice, and destiny, things larger than ordinary life. As the storm intensified outside, she turned another page and found an illustration of a majestic king standing upon a mountain cliff beneath a silver moon. Something about the image captured her attention, not because of the crown, not because of the power, but because of the expression on his face. He looked lonely. The realization surprised her. Even the heroes in stories carried burdens. Even kings could feel isolated. The thought lingered with her long after she closed the book. Outside, the storm continued building strength. Snow fell harder. Wind howled through the trees. Far beyond the cabin, hidden somewhere deep within the mountains, another traveler was battling the same storm. Olivia knew nothing about him. She did not know his name. She did not know his rank. She certainly did not know that the fate of an entire kingdom rested upon his shoulders. Yet destiny was already moving quietly through the darkness between them. As midnight approached, Olivia added another log to the fire and settled into bed. The cabin felt warm despite the weather outside. Safe, peaceful. For the first time in months, she drifted into sleep with a faint smile on her face. She did not realize that before another sunrise arrived, everything she had carefully rebuilt was about to change forever. The storm arrived before dawn. Olivia woke to the sound of wind pressing against the cabin walls with surprising force. For several moments she remained beneath her blanket, listening to the weather rage outside. Snow struck the roof in steady waves. The pine trees groaned softly beneath powerful gusts. It sounded as though winter itself had come alive. She rose from bed and moved toward the small window. Beyond the glass, the world had vanished beneath swirling white. Visibility stretched no more than 20 feet in any direction. The forest was gone. The mountains were gone. Even the narrow path leading away from the cabin had disappeared beneath fresh snow. Olivia stirred the fire and prepared a simple breakfast while the storm continued building strength. Most people would have remained indoors on a day like this. Normally, she would have done the same. But by late morning she noticed something unusual. One of the wooden shutters on the side of the cabin had broken loose during the night. If left unattended, the storm might damage the entire window frame. Wrapping herself in her thick winter cloak, Olivia stepped outside. The cold immediately stole her breath. Snow swirled around her in endless spirals. The wind tugged at her clothing and scattered loose strands of blonde hair across her face. She secured the damaged shutter as quickly as possible. The task should have taken only a few minutes. Yet as she turned back toward the cabin, a faint sound reached her through the storm. Olivia froze. At first she assumed it was the wind. Then she heard it again. A distant whinny. A horse. The sound came from somewhere beyond the trees. She frowned. Few travelers ventured into the northern wilderness during winter. Fewer still would be foolish enough to travel through a storm like this. The horse called out again. This time it sounded closer. Distressed. Without fully thinking, Olivia grabbed a lantern from beside the door and followed the sound into the forest. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she pushed through the storm. Visibility remained poor. Several times she nearly lost her footing on hidden drifts. Yet the sound continued, drawing her forward. 10 minutes later, she reached a small clearing partially sheltered by towering pines. There she found the horse. The magnificent animal stood near a fallen tree, its white coat dusted with snow. The creature appeared healthy but restless, pacing anxiously through the clearing. Olivia immediately noticed the saddle. This was not a wild horse. Someone had been riding it. Her heart quickened. She looked around carefully. At first she saw nothing except swirling snow. Then movement caught her eye near the base of a large evergreen. A man lay partially sheltered beneath the branches. Olivia hurried toward him. As she knelt beside him, concern tightened in her chest. The stranger appeared unconscious. Snow had collected across his dark coat. His dark hair was damp from the storm. Even beneath the harsh weather, she could tell he was handsome. More importantly, he was alive. She could see the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Relief washed through her immediately. The horse stepped closer, watching her carefully, as if waiting to see what she would do. Olivia glanced between the stranger and the distant cabin hidden somewhere beyond the storm. Logic told her this situation could be dangerous. She did not know who he was. She did not know why he was alone in the mountains. Yet another part of her already knew the answer. She could not leave him here. Not like this. Not alone. Taking a deep breath, Olivia gently reached for his hand. The moment their skin touched, something strange happened. A sudden warmth traveled through her fingers. Brief, fleeting, yet unmistakably real. Startled, she looked at the unconscious stranger once more. Snow continued falling around them. The horse remained silent. And somewhere deep inside her chest, a feeling she could not explain began to stir. The storm made the journey back to the cabin far more difficult than Olivia expected. Snow reached nearly to her knees in some places, and the wind seemed determined to push her backward with every step. Yet she refused to give up. The stranger was taller and heavier than she had first realized, but somehow she managed to guide him forward while the white horse followed closely behind. Several times she considered stopping to rest, but each glance at the unconscious man reminded her why she could not. His breathing remained steady, yet the cold continued to steal warmth from his body. Nearly an hour later, the cabin finally emerged through the swirling snow like a lantern in the darkness. Relief flooded through her. With tremendous effort, she helped the stranger inside and settled him onto the narrow bed near the fireplace. The moment the door closed behind them, the cabin felt almost impossibly warm compared to the storm outside. The horse found shelter beneath the covered porch while Olivia immediately added more wood to the fire. Golden light filled the room. Slowly, the icy chill began to retreat. For the next several hours, she focused entirely on caring for her unexpected guest. She heated water, dried the snow from his coat, wrapped extra blankets around him. The stranger never fully woke, though once or twice she noticed slight movement, as if he were struggling through a distant dream. By evening, exhaustion finally caught up with her. Olivia sat in a chair beside the fireplace and studied the man sleeping across the room. Up close, he looked different from anyone she had ever met. His features carried a quiet strength. His dark hair framed a face that seemed carved from confidence and responsibility. Even asleep, he appeared accustomed to leadership. The observation made her smile faintly. Perhaps she was imagining things. After all, he could simply be a traveler caught in a storm. Yet something about him felt important. The mysterious warmth she had felt in the forest lingered in her thoughts. She could not explain it. The sensation had vanished almost immediately, leaving only questions behind. The fire crackled softly between them. Outside, the storm continued its relentless song against the windows. Hours passed. At some point, the stranger shifted slightly and opened his eyes. Olivia looked up from the book resting in her lap. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The man seemed disoriented. His silver eyes moved slowly across the cabin, taking in the fireplace, the wooden walls, the small table near the window. Then his gaze settled on her. Something unexpected passed through his expression. Not confusion, recognition, as though seeing her somehow eased a burden he had been carrying. Olivia immediately stood and crossed the room. "You are safe," she said softly. Her voice sounded almost strange after spending so much time alone. The stranger studied her face for several seconds before giving a slight nod. His voice, when it finally came, was deep and calm. "I owe you my thanks." The simple words carried surprising sincerity. Olivia felt heat rise to her cheeks and quickly looked away. Gratitude was not something she was accustomed to receiving. "Anyone would have helped," she replied. The stranger's eyes remained on her. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "No," he said quietly. "Not everyone would." The answer lingered in the room long after he spoke it. Olivia found herself unexpectedly unsettled. Not because of his words, but because of how genuine they felt. Outside, snow continued falling beneath the darkness. Inside, the firelight danced across the cabin walls. For the first time in months, Olivia was not alone. And neither of them realized that this quiet moment beside a fireplace would soon alter the course of both their lives. The storm finally passed 2 days later. Sunlight returned to the wilderness, spilling across the snow-covered forest in brilliant shades of gold and silver. The world outside the cabin seemed transformed. Ice sparkled on every branch. The frozen creek glistened beneath the clear blue sky. For the first time since finding the stranger, Olivia allowed herself to believe everything would be fine. The man recovered quickly. Each morning he appeared stronger than the day before. By the third day, he was able to leave the bed and sit beside the fireplace. By the fourth, he helped carry firewood from the covered porch. Olivia found herself watching him more often than she intended. There was something unusual about him. Not merely his appearance. Not merely the quiet confidence he carried. It was the way he noticed things. Small things. The way he thanked her every time she brought him tea. The way he repaired a loose cabinet hinge without being asked. The way he always made sure she stepped safely across icy patches when they walked outside. No one had ever paid such careful attention to her before. The realization made her strangely nervous. During meals, they spoke more often. The conversations remained simple at first. Stories about winter storms. Favorite books. The challenges of surviving alone in the mountains. Yet gradually the walls between them began to soften. Olivia learned that he enjoyed old legends and history. He learned that she could identify dozens of medicinal herbs hidden beneath snow. Sometimes they sat near the fire long after sunset, while shadows danced across the cabin walls. Neither seemed eager for the evenings to end. One afternoon, while gathering firewood near the edge of the forest, Olivia noticed him studying the landscape with a distant expression. The sunlight illuminated his dark hair, while the cold breeze tugged gently at his coat. For a moment, he appeared less like a traveler and more like someone carrying responsibilities far beyond this quiet wilderness. "You seem far away today," Olivia said. The stranger smiled faintly. "Perhaps I am." His answer was honest, yet incomplete. Olivia sensed there were many things he was not telling her. Strangely, she did not mind. Everyone carried secrets. She understood that better than most. As the days passed, a comfortable routine formed between them. Mornings were spent working around the cabin. Afternoons often ended with long walks through the snowy forest. Evenings belonged to the firelight. Olivia could not remember the last time she had laughed so often. Small moments became precious. A shared smile. A joke. The simple comfort of another person's presence. Yet beneath the growing warmth, uncertainty remained. The stranger still had not revealed much about himself. Olivia knew only that he was traveling north when the storm struck. Nothing more. One evening, she found herself standing by the window after he had gone to sleep. Moonlight covered the forest in silver light. The wilderness stretched endlessly beyond the cabin. Beautiful, quiet, isolated. She should have felt content. Instead, a strange worry settled into her heart. The stranger would eventually leave. Travelers always did. Their lives existed beyond places like this, beyond forgotten cabins and lonely forests. The thought bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Behind her, the fire crackled softly. Across the room, the man slept peacefully beneath a blanket she had sewn herself months earlier. Olivia looked away from the window and allowed herself one final glance. Something had changed during these few days. Something she could not name. She only knew that when he eventually walked out that door, the cabin would feel emptier than it ever had before. Neither of them realized that destiny was already racing toward them through the mountains. And when it arrived, nothing would remain the same. The following morning arrived bright and clear. Fresh snow sparkled beneath a pale winter sun, and for the first time in days the mountains seemed calm. Olivia stepped outside carrying a basket of firewood, grateful for the quiet. The forest felt peaceful, the kind of peace that made a person believe nothing could possibly disturb it. She had just reached the cabin porch when an unfamiliar sound echoed across the valley. Hoofbeats. Many of them. Olivia froze immediately. Travelers rarely came this far north. An entire group was almost unheard of. The sound grew louder with every passing second. She set down the basket and moved toward the edge of the clearing. Within moments, several riders emerged from the trees. Their horses were large and powerful. Dark cloaks billowed behind them as they crossed the snow-covered landscape. What caught Olivia's attention most was the silver crest displayed on their uniforms. Even from a distance, she recognized it. The royal crest of the High Kingdom. Her pulse quickened. The riders slowed the moment they spotted the cabin. One of them pointed toward the porch. Another immediately urged his horse forward. Before Olivia could fully process what was happening, the stranger stepped outside behind her. The moment the riders saw him, everything changed. Every horse came to an immediate stop. Every rider dismounted. Then, in perfect unison, they lowered their heads. The clearing fell completely silent. Olivia stared in confusion. The stranger remained calm, almost as though he had expected this moment all along. A tall, silver-haired warrior stepped forward from the group. Relief flooded his face. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "we have been searching for weeks." Olivia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Your Majesty." The words echoed inside her mind. She slowly turned toward the man she had welcomed into her home. The man who had shared meals beside her fireplace. The man who had carried firewood and laughed with her beneath the stars. The stranger met her gaze. For the first time since they met, there was no mystery in his expression. Only honesty. "My name is Rowan Blackwood," he said gently. "I am the Alpha King." Olivia could not speak. Every story she had ever heard suddenly returned at once. The powerful ruler of the United Packs. The leader whose decisions shaped entire territories. The Alpha King. She had spent days treating him like an ordinary traveler. Heat rushed to her face. Embarrassment mixed with disbelief. Yet Rowan showed no sign of offense. If anything, he looked concerned. Concerned about her reaction. The realization surprised her. Around them, the royal guards exchanged glances filled with curiosity. They were clearly trying to understand who this woman was and why their king had been living in a remote cabin. Rowan stepped closer. "Olivia," he began. Her name sounded different when he said it. Softer. More personal. Before he could continue, one of the guards approached carrying a sealed leather case. "There are urgent matters waiting in the capital, Your Majesty," the man said respectfully. Rowan's expression tightened slightly. Duty. Responsibility. The life he had temporarily escaped. Olivia understood immediately. The distance between their worlds suddenly felt enormous. She looked toward the mountains beyond the clearing. A simple Omega who had been forgotten by her own pack. A king responsible for an entire kingdom. The contrast could not have been clearer. As the guards prepared the horses, Rowan continued watching her. Something unspoken lingered between them. Neither knew exactly how to address it. Yet deep inside her heart, Olivia already sensed that the peaceful days they had shared inside the cabin were coming to an end. And for reasons she could not fully explain, that realization hurt far more than she expected. That evening felt different from every evening that had come before. The cabin remained the same. The fire still crackled softly inside the stone fireplace. Snow still rested upon the windowsills. Yet the warmth that had once filled the small home seemed to have faded. Olivia sat quietly at the wooden table while voices drifted from outside. The royal guards were preparing for departure. Horses shifted across the snow. Saddlebags were secured. Orders were exchanged in low voices. Every sound reminded her of the truth she could no longer ignore. Rowan belonged to a world far beyond this forest. A world of castles, councils, and responsibilities she could barely imagine. For days she had known him only as a traveler. Now she saw the reality. He was the Alpha King, the most powerful Alpha in the kingdom. And she was simply Olivia Carter, a rejected Omega living alone in the wilderness. The distance between those two lives felt impossible to cross. Later that night, while carrying fresh water from the well behind the cabin, Olivia accidentally overheard two guards speaking near the stable shelter. They did not know she was nearby. "The council will be relieved when he returns," one said. Especially after the discussions regarding his future mate. Olivia froze. The bucket felt suddenly heavier in her hands. "They have been waiting for years," the second guard replied. "Every major Alpha family in the kingdom hopes for an alliance." The first man laughed softly. "Whoever becomes Luna will shape the future of the realm." Their voices faded as they walked away. Olivia remained standing alone beneath the moonlight. A cold ache settled quietly inside her chest. She should not have been surprised. Of course there would be expectations surrounding an alpha king. Of course powerful families would compete for his attention. That was how kingdoms worked. That was how people like Rowan lived. Yet hearing it spoken aloud somehow made everything more real. She returned to the cabin and placed the water bucket beside the sink. Across the room, Rowan sat reading beside the fire. He looked up immediately when she entered. The concern in his eyes only made things harder. Over the past several days, she had allowed herself to forget reality. She had allowed herself to enjoy his company without asking what happened next. Now she knew better. The future she had quietly imagined could never exist. Not for someone like her. Not for someone like him. Long after Rowan retired for the night, Olivia remained awake. Moonlight spilled through the window and stretched across the wooden floor. The cabin felt smaller than usual. The silence felt heavier. Eventually she stood and moved toward the shelf above the fireplace. Her gaze settled on a folded blue scarf. Rowan had complimented it several days earlier while helping her organize supplies. The memory made her smile sadly. Then she made her decision. It came quietly, without drama, without tears, simply certainty. Before dawn, Olivia packed a small canvas bag with necessities. Food, extra clothing, her favorite book, the same belongings she had carried when she left Moonridge months earlier. The cabin was still dark when she stepped beside Rowan's chair near the fireplace. For a long moment, she simply looked at him. He slept peacefully, unaware of the choice she had made. 1,000 words filled her heart. None of them could be spoken. Gently, she placed the blue scarf across the back of the chair where he would see it. A small goodbye, nothing more. Then she slipped out the door and into the fading darkness. Snow crunched softly beneath her boots as she disappeared into the forest. Behind her, the cabin remained silent beneath the first hints of dawn. Ahead lay uncertainty, loneliness, distance. Yet Olivia kept walking, because she had spent her entire life learning how to leave before someone else decided she did not belong. Rowan woke just before sunrise. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. The fire still glowed softly inside the fireplace. Pale morning light filtered through the frosted windows. The familiar scent of pine wood lingered in the air. Then he noticed the silence. Something felt wrong. He sat up slowly and looked around the cabin. The chair near the window stood empty. The small kettle hanging above the hearth was cold. No footsteps moved across the wooden floor. No gentle voice greeted the morning. A strange unease settled immediately in his chest. "Olivia," he called. The sound of her name echoed softly through the cabin. No answer came. Rowan stood and searched the small home. The bedroom, the kitchen, the porch. Nothing. The unease quickly deepened into concern. Then his eyes found the blue scarf draped neatly across the back of his chair. He froze. For several seconds he simply stared at it. The scarf looked ordinary. Yet somehow it explained everything. Slowly he picked it up. The soft fabric still carried the faint scent of pine and winter air. Olivia had left it intentionally. A goodbye? The realization struck harder than he expected. Outside, the camp had already begun stirring. Guards prepared horses while servants organized supplies for the return journey. Rowan stepped onto the porch, the scarf still in his hand. Fresh tracks stretched away from the cabin and disappeared into the forest. She had left before dawn. Alone. His jaw tightened. One of the commanders immediately approached. "Your Majesty, we are ready to depart whenever you give the order." Rowan barely heard him. His gaze remained fixed on the distant tree line. The forest looked endless beneath the morning light. "Where is she?" he asked quietly. The commander blinked. "Your Majesty?" Rowan turned toward him. "The woman who lives here. Where is she?" Understanding slowly dawned across the man's face. "We have not seen her since yesterday evening." Rowan looked back toward the woods. The answer only confirmed what he already knew. Olivia had chosen to leave. Not because she wanted to. Because she believed she had to. The thought settled heavily in his chest. During the days spent in the cabin, he had allowed himself something he rarely experienced. Peace. He had forgotten council meetings. Forgotten political alliances. Forgotten the endless expectations attached to the crown. In that small cabin, he had simply been Rowan. Not Alpha King. Not ruler. Just a man sharing quiet evenings beside a fire with someone who expected nothing from him. And now she was gone. Rowan lowered his gaze to the scarf. Memories flooded back. Her smile while gathering herbs beneath fresh snow. Her laughter during a card game by the fireplace. The way she always looked toward the mountains at sunset. Small moments. Simple moments. Yet they felt more valuable than many of the grand achievements celebrated in the capital. She saved your life, Your Majesty, one of the older guards said gently. Rowan looked up. The man offered a knowing smile. Perhaps she thought leaving would make things easier. Rowan glanced toward the distant forest once more. Easier. Perhaps. But not better. The realization came with startling clarity. Olivia had spent her entire life believing she was easy to leave behind. Easy to forget. Easy to replace. Yet during the short time they had shared, she had become impossible to ignore. Impossible to forget. Rowan closed his hand around the scarf. The winter wind stirred through the clearing. Beyond the trees, miles of wilderness stretched in every direction. Somewhere out there, Olivia was walking away from him, believing their story had ended. Rowan looked toward his waiting horse, and then toward the forest. For the first time in many years, an alpha king found himself caring far less about returning to a throne than about finding one woman who had quietly disappeared before he could tell her how much she truly mattered. Olivia walked until the cabin disappeared behind the endless sea of pine trees. The winter sun climbed higher into the sky, casting long ribbons of light across the snow-covered landscape. Her boots left a solitary trail winding through the forest. Every step carried her farther from the life she had briefly allowed herself to imagine. Yet she never looked back. She had learned long ago that looking back only made leaving harder. By midday, she reached a narrow ridge overlooking a frozen valley. The view stretched for miles beneath a brilliant blue sky. Normally, she would have stopped to admire it. Today, she barely noticed. Her thoughts remained fixed on the cabin, on the firelight, on Rowan. The name alone was enough to make her chest ache. She wondered if he had already left. Wondered if the royal guards had escorted him safely toward the capital. Wondered if he would eventually forget these past few weeks the same way powerful people forgot so many things. The questions followed her like shadows. Several hundred miles away, beyond mountains and rivers, kingdoms waited for their king. Advisors waited. Councils waited. Noble families waited. Yet Rowan remained standing in front of a small cabin deep within the northern wilderness. His horse stood ready. His guards stood ready. Everything necessary for departure had been prepared. Still he had not moved. The blue scarf remained wrapped around his hand. One of the commanders approached cautiously. Your Majesty, if we leave now, we can reach the southern pass before nightfall. Rowan nodded slowly. Then he surprised everyone. Send riders to every nearby settlement. The commander blinked. Your Majesty? Rowan looked toward the forest. Find out if anyone has seen a woman traveling alone. Blonde hair, blue eyes, carrying a canvas bag. The commander stared for a moment before lowering his head. At once, within minutes, riders were moving in every direction. The kingdom had spent weeks searching for its missing Alpha King. Now the Alpha King had begun searching for someone else. Hours later, Olivia reached a crossroads deep within the mountains. Several weathered signs pointed toward distant territories. She paused there, uncertain. For the first time since leaving the cabin, she realized she had no destination. She had only known she needed to leave. Beyond that, everything remained unclear. A cold wind swept across the ridge. Olivia tightened her coat and looked toward the fading afternoon sun. Then she noticed something caught on a nearby tree branch. A small strip of blue fabric fluttered gently in the breeze. The same color as the scarf she had left behind. Her breath caught. It was only coincidence. It had to be. Yet the sight made her smile despite herself. Somewhere behind her, Rowan was holding the original scarf. Somewhere ahead, the future waited. Neither of them knew exactly what came next. But something had changed. For the first time in her life, Olivia was not running from rejection. She was walking toward an unknown future. And for the first time in many years, Rowan was no longer thinking like a king. He was thinking like a man who had finally found something worth searching for. As evening settled across the snowy wilderness, two separate paths stretched beneath the same fading sky. One carried a woman who believed she had quietly disappeared. The other carried a king who had just begun the search. And somewhere beyond the mountains, destiny smiled patiently, knowing their story was far from over.